Jasmine Crockett, the fearless champion of justice, takes on Candace Owens, the conservative provocateur whose extremist views have set the nation on fire. What starts as a heated debate on racial justice explodes when Owens shockingly praises nationalism and defends Hitler, sending shockwaves through America. With millions watching in disbelief, Crockett unleashes a ruthless takedown, exposing Owens's dangerous agenda, sparking a firestorm of backlash. The stakes couldn't be higher. Will the truth destroy Owens, or will her radical rhetoric continue to poison the country? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The lights in the auditorium dimmed as the camera panned across a hushed room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Jasmine Crockett stood at one podium, Candace Owens at the other, each woman a symbol of the ideological divide that had come to define America's political landscape. The debate, broadcast live to millions, was set to be a showdown between two powerful voices. The topic was clear: the future of racial justice and the treatment of minorities in the United States. This wasn't just another political discussion. It was a clash of visions for the future, with the nation watching closely. Crockett, a rising star in the Democratic Party, had made it her mission to expose and dismantle the systems of inequality that plagued American society. Owens, the unapologetic conservative commentator, was firmly grounded in the belief that America's problems weren't about race, but personal responsibility and choice. The stage was set, and as the audience waited for the first words to be spoken, it was clear that what would follow wasn't just a debate, it was a battle for the soul of the nation. The room was thick with anticipation as Owens's words settled into the air, the tension so palpable it was almost suffocating. Her declaration, "Black Lives Matter," was nothing more than a scheme for financial gain, a movement built on division, hung like a heavy cloud over the room. She spoke with such certainty, her voice cold, almost clinical, as if dismissing the pain of millions was as easy as spouting off an opinion. The crowd, taken aback, murmured quietly, but no one dared speak up yet. Owens had just made a claim that would force Crockett to respond. The next few moments would determine the direction of this debate. Candace Owens, with a calculated gaze, continued, "Let's be clear, Black Lives Matter isn't a movement for justice. It's a way to profit off of division, off of the fear they've created. This isn't about uplifting Black Americans. This is about making money by exploiting racial injustice." Her words echoed in the space, her voice a mix of anger and arrogance. "I said it at Turning Point USA," she continued, her eyes narrowing. "This movement is nothing more than people using the very real issue of racial inequality to line their pockets and keep the nation in turmoil." The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension thickening. Owens had just issued a direct challenge not only to the movement itself, but to every person who believed in its cause. The accusation was sharp, biting, and in that moment, it felt like a personal affront to every Black American who had ever marched for their rights, for their lives to matter. Jasmine Crockett's fists tightened, her face hardened with a fire that had been building ever since Owens first opened her mouth. The audacity, the complete dismissal of the lived reality of so many, stung like salt in an open wound. This was no longer a debate, it was a call for action. Crockett knew that in this moment, her words needed to carry the weight of history, the truth, and the fight for justice that was far from over. She stepped forward, her voice rising, not in anger, but in unshakable resolve. "Candace, let me be very clear. What you just said is not just irresponsible, it's dangerous. You're telling millions of Americans that their pain, their struggle, the lives lost in the streets, that all of it is just a scheme to make money. You've just spit in the face of every Black person who has been denied justice. You've dismissed their fight for equality as nothing more than a business venture." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And let's not forget, you've said it yourself in front of thousands at Turning Point USA. You've labeled Black Lives Matter as exploitation. But let me tell you, Candace, it's not Black Lives Matter that is exploiting anything. It's people like you who profit off spreading division, who twist the truth to suit your narrative, and who refuse to see the real problem, a system that is rigged against people of color." The words fell heavy on the audience, their weight undeniable. The tension in the room had shifted as Crockett had taken Owens' accusations and turned them back with the force of truth. "You can sit there and accuse people of exploiting injustice," she continued, her voice steady, each word landing with precision. "But the real exploitation, Candace, is the way you've used your platform to deny the very real, ongoing fight for justice. You don't know what it's like to walk in our shoes, to face the system that was built to keep us down. You've never had to fight for the right to exist in a world that views you as less than." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. The balance had shifted. Jasmine Crockett had stepped into the ring and not only matched Owens, but had also exposed the dangerous rhetoric she was pushing. It wasn't just about politics. It was about the very lives that were being disregarded in the name of profit, power, and control. And in that moment, it was clear who was fighting for justice and who was trying to tear it all down. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as Candace Owens pressed on, her words slicing through the air with the precision of a scalpel. "Let's talk about the real issues," she began, her voice steady, yet cold, as though she had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. "The crime rates, the violence, the poverty. These are the things Black Americans need to be focusing on, not some fabricated notion of systemic oppression." Owens's eyes swept across the room, challenging anyone to disagree, to interrupt. She knew she had the audience on the edge, waiting for the next punch. "You claim Black Lives Matter's about justice, but in reality, it's about creating division, not healing. It's a movement that thrives off anger, off chaos, and off people who are desperate for change but are being lied to about what's really holding them back." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle, as if daring anyone to challenge her logic. "The statistics don't lie," she continued. "The crime rates in Black neighborhoods are higher than anywhere else. The poverty rates are astronomical. Black Americans are not being held back by some unseen hand. It's the result of their own choices, their own communities that have failed them." Owen's voice grew more forceful, leaning into the microphone, each syllable cutting through the heavy silence. "Black Lives Matter doesn't address that. They don't talk about the root causes of poverty. They don't talk about the rampant crime in these communities or how it perpetuates the cycle of despair. They just point the finger at the system and say, it's all the system's fault, but they're not helping anyone by doing that. They're making it worse." Her words reverberated throughout the room, sinking in like a weight that settled deep in the chest. For a moment, it seemed as if the audience was hanging on her every word, some nodding in agreement, others stunned into silence. It was a sharp contrast to Jasmine Crockett, whose expression was a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. She had heard this rhetoric before, the blame placed squarely on the shoulders of the community, the denial of the systemic issues that continued to perpetuate inequality. But hearing it here, in this moment, from Owens, who had built her platform on discrediting movements like Black Lives Matter, made her blood boil. She took a slow, deliberate breath, steadying herself, and then stepped forward, the anger in her chest transforming into something far more powerful: resolve. "Candace," Crockett began, her voice calm but firm, "you stand here, throwing out numbers and statistics like they explain the reality of Black America. But they don't. They don't come close to touching the heart of the issue. Crime rates, yes, they're higher in certain communities, but you fail to ask why that is. You ignore the why behind the poverty, behind the crime, behind the struggles people face every day. You say it's because of bad choices, but what about the choices people have not been given? What about the generations of families who have had doors closed to them? What about the communities that have been systematically stripped of opportunity?" The audience shifted in their seats, leaning in, drawn into the intensity of her words. Crockett's voice didn't waver as she pressed on, each word more forceful than the last. "You can't just throw out numbers and pretend they explain away centuries of injustice. You talk about crime and poverty like they're isolated issues, but they're not. They are the direct result of a system that was designed to keep people of color in a perpetual state of disadvantage. And to sit here and pretend that Black Lives Matter doesn't address that it doesn't call out the very system that has kept people in chains for hundreds of years, is not only dishonest, it's dangerous." Crockett's eyes never left Owens as she continued, her voice rising with every word. You want to talk about crime? What about the crimes committed by the system itself? The way black families are ripped apart by mass incarceration? The way entire communities are policed like war zones while white communities are left untouched? You talk about poverty like it's a choice, but you ignore the fact that the same system you defend has denied black Americans the ability to build wealth, to access quality education, to own property. You ignore the fact that redlining, voter suppression, and unequal schooling are still very much alive today. The weight of her words hit hard, each one an undeniable truth that Owens couldn't escape. You want to talk about Black Lives Matter? They're not the problem. The problem is that people like you refuse to see the problem. You refuse to see the lives lost, the families destroyed, the communities left behind. You refuse to see the history of systemic racism that still shapes every part of our society. Crockett's voice softened slightly, but the conviction in it was unmistakable. Until you understand that, until you see the truth of what's happening in this country, you will never be part of the solution. You'll always be part of the problem. For a moment, there was only silence. The audience, once divided, now seemed unified in their gaze upon Crockett, their attention fixed on her every word. Owens, once so confident, stood there, her face unreadable. The words had cut through the defenses she had built around her, and for the first time in the debate, there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. The truth had been spoken, and it was clear that Crockett wasn't just defending a movement. She was defending the lives of millions of Americans who had been silenced for far too long. The room fell into an unnatural silence, the weight of Jasmine Crockett's words still hanging heavily in the air. The debate, once fiery and impassioned, had taken a turn. But before anyone could fully digest the force of Crockett's last statement, something shifted. A soft buzz echoed through the room, cutting through the tension, drawing everyone's eyes to the large screen behind the podium. The crowd stilled, unsure of what was about to happen. A video, dated from 2018, was now playing. The clip was brief, but it was enough to shatter the narrative Owens had so carefully constructed. The camera zoomed in on Owens, standing confidently at a Turning Point USA event, her voice ringing out with disturbing clarity. "Nationalism, that's what we need," she said, her tone unflinching. "Hitler was a nationalist, and if we're being honest, his methods were just misunderstood." The words hit like a sledgehammer, reverberating through the room. The audience was frozen, disbelief and shock sweeping across the faces of those watching. It wasn't just an offhand remark. Owens had explicitly linked herself to a man responsible for one of the most horrific genocides in human history. For a moment, the room was entirely still. The weight of what had just been said hung in the air like a suffocating cloud. Owens, whose career had been built on a foundation of fiery conservative rhetoric and sharp rebuttals, stood motionless. Her face, once confident and self-assured, now appeared strained, her features tightening as she realized the gravity of what was unfolding. The very words she had spoken in that moment had become her undoing. Jasmine Crockett watched Owens carefully, sensing the shift in the room. The debate had transcended politics. It was now about history, truth, and accountability. Owens had just exposed the dangerous undercurrent of her beliefs, the ideologies she had long tried to hide behind a facade of patriotic conservatism. The audience, once captivated by Owens' rhetoric, now began to murmur, their faces shifting from admiration to suspicion. What was once a celebrated figure among the conservative base was now being exposed as something far more troubling. The video continued to circulate online, and the internet erupted in a frenzy. Social media platforms exploded with the hashtag #Candace Owens exposed trending globally. The backlash was immediate, swift, and unforgiving. On Twitter, prominent conservative voices began to distance themselves. One user tweeted, "I can't believe I ever stood by her. There's no room for this kind of rhetoric in our movement." Another conservative pundit wrote, "Nationalism doesn't mean embracing a tyrant. She's lost all credibility." Even Owens' usual allies were left scrambling for explanations as the video continued to spread like wildfire, with news outlets picking up the story and dissecting every word. The backlash was not just from the left. It was from conservatives who had once championed her as a voice of reason. Owens had crossed a line that few were willing to follow. The revelation wasn't just a scandal, it was a betrayal of the very principles she had long claimed to uphold. Her words had stripped away the mask she had worn, revealing a troubling truth that couldn't be ignored. Crockett, seizing the moment, didn't hesitate. She stood tall, her eyes locked on Owens, and addressed the room, her voice strong and unwavering. "What you've just seen is the reality of Candace Owens," she said, her words cutting through the thick silence. "This is who she really is. She's been masquerading as a defender of freedom, a voice of reason, but in truth she's an apologist for dangerous ideologies. Ideologies that have led to suffering, pain, and death throughout history." Crockett's gaze never wavered from Owens as she continued, her voice rising with the intensity of someone who had just witnessed a moment of history unraveling. "She sits here and claims to fight for the people, but her words show her true allegiance to a distorted vision of nationalism that seeks to divide rather than unite. She can hide behind the guise of patriotism, but the truth is clear. She's not advocating for freedom. She's advocating for a return to a past filled with hate and violence." The room was still, the weight of Crockett's words settling over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Some people were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others were staring at Owens, trying to process the reality of what had just been exposed. Owens, once so confident, now appeared cornered, her composure cracking in the face of the truth that had just been revealed. There was no escaping this moment. No carefully crafted defense could undo the damage. The truth was out, and it was clear that this moment would forever alter the trajectory of the debate, and perhaps Owens' career as well. The fallout had begun, and it was going to be much larger than just this room. It was a reckoning. And for Owens, it was a reckoning that could not be undone. The tension in the room was now unbearable, thick with the weight of the revelations that had been laid bare. Candace Owens, once so confident and poised, now stood at the center of the storm she had created. The video from 2018, where she had openly praised nationalism and made an appalling comparison to Hitler, still echoed in the air like a dark shadow. The crowd was still reeling, uncertain of how to process the words they had just heard. But Jasmine Crockett, whose resolve had been hardened over years of fighting for justice, stood unfazed. She could see the cracks in Owens' carefully constructed narrative. The facade was slipping, and it was only a matter of time before the truth would overwhelm her. Crockett, her voice steady but filled with an intensity that made every word feel like a hammer striking iron, stepped forward. "Candace, you want to play the victim, claim that your words were taken out of context, but the reality is this. You can't hide behind excuses anymore. Those words, your words, are out there for the world to see, and they speak volumes about who you really are. You may try to claim that you've been misunderstood, but that doesn't change the fact that you've just openly aligned yourself with the very ideologies that have caused untold suffering for millions. You've given a voice to hate and extremism, and now you want to brush it off as misunderstanding." Crockett's eyes never left Owens as she continued, each sentence growing in weight, her conviction palpable. "You can deny all you want that you support Hitler or that you believe in any form of nationalism that glorifies his methods. But the truth is, you're trying to rewrite history. You've given a pass to an ideology that's responsible for one of the most horrific genocides in human history. You can try to claim you were misunderstood, but your words are clear, and they've made it clear who you stand with. And it's not the side of justice, equality, or humanity." The room was silent, every person holding their breath as the weight of Crockett's words sank in. Owens, visibly uncomfortable, adjusted her posture, trying to regain control. But the cracks were deep, and there was no easy way to mend them. Crockett, with a steely determination, pressed on. "You talk about division, Candace," Crockett said, her voice now rising with a quiet fury. "But it's people like you who are the real architects of division in this country. You preach about unity, but you're doing nothing but sowing hatred and mistrust. You've used your platform to spread dangerous ideas, to promote an agenda that not only threatens the very fabric of our society, but also endangers the lives of millions. You say you're fighting for America, but the truth is you're dividing us." You've taken something as sacred as the pursuit of justice and used it to fuel your own personal gain, to prop up dangerous ideologies that have no place in our world. Owens's face was now flushed with frustration. She tried to interrupt, to deny the accusations, but Crockett wasn't finished. With each word, she drove home the truth Owens could not escape. This isn't just about what you said in a video, Candace. It's about everything you've stood for, everything you've used your platform to promote. This isn't an isolated incident. You've been spreading lies, exploiting the pain of others to further your own agenda. And the truth is, you've sold out the very people you claim to speak for. You've made a career out of dividing this country, of turning people against each other, of making the powerful feel comfortable in their ignorance, while the rest of us are left to deal with the fallout. The words hung in the air, each one feeling like a final blow. Owens' deflections grew weaker with every passing second, and Crockett knew she had the upper hand. The truth had been exposed, and there was no escaping it. Owens was trapped in her own lies, and now Crockett had exposed her for the world to see. "You can't take back what you said," Crockett continued, her voice now calm but filled with an undeniable strength. "You can't rewrite history. You can't just walk away from the reality of the damage you've done. The words you spoke reflect your true beliefs, no matter how hard you try to distance yourself from them now." The crowd, who had been silently watching the back and forth, began to shift, their reactions ranging from disbelief to nods of agreement. Some of them now understood what had been at stake in this debate. Not just political differences, but the very values that defined what it meant to be an American. And in this moment, Crockett was standing firm in her commitment to those values, unwilling to let Owens' dangerous rhetoric go unchecked. Owens, now visibly shaken, took a step back, her composure slipping. The strength she had projected just moments ago was gone, replaced by a growing sense of panic. The truth was undeniable, and for the first time she had no words to defend herself. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about exposing the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. The room, now charged with the weight of the truth, was waiting for her response. But no response came. The silence that followed was deafening, and it was clear. The battle for truth had already been won. The debate had barely ended, but the ripple effects of Candace Owens' controversial comments began to unfold in real time. Within moments of the confrontation, social media platforms exploded with activity. The world now focused entirely on the video that had surfaced and Owens' words. The revelation about her praising nationalism and defending Hitler, even in passing, was not something that could be ignored. The room had barely cleared before the storm began. News outlets quickly picked up on the story, and soon headlines were blaring. Candace Owens faces backlash. Over nationalism remarks, and Owens under fire for controversial comments about Hitler and nationalism. The shockwaves were felt not just on the left, but within conservative circles as well. What had been a routine political debate had now turned into a public relations nightmare for Owens, as the story quickly went viral. Owens, once celebrated by many for her bold commentary, was now the target of widespread criticism. The public had rallied, and it wasn't just progressives calling out her dangerous rhetoric. Conservative voices, those who had once championed Owens for challenging the left, were now distancing themselves from her. "This is not what we stand for," one conservative influencer tweeted, followed by another. "This is not acceptable. This rhetoric has no place in a true patriot's discourse." The backlash came swiftly and relentlessly. On Twitter, hashtags like Candace Owens exposed and Shame on Owens trended. The video, which had been recorded years ago, was now dissected frame by frame, analyzed by commentators from all sides of the political spectrum. The conservative base that had once rallied behind her was now scrambling to distance itself from Owens' shocking remarks. People were demanding answers, forcing Owens to confront her own words, a confrontation she was unprepared for. As the media storm escalated, Jasmine Crockett's voice rose above the noise. She wasn't just going to sit back and watch Owens try to spin her way out of the mess. No, Crockett took the fight straight to her. She took to social media and the press, ensuring that the world would see Owens for what she truly was. "What you've just witnessed," Crockett wrote in a tweet that went viral within hours, "is a woman who has spent years denying the truth of systemic racism, only to reveal she stands with the very ideologies that have sought to destroy the progress we've fought so hard to make. She is not a champion of freedom, but a voice for division. Crockett didn't let the moment slip by. She wasn't going to allow Owens to hide behind excuses or claims of being misunderstood. With each interview, each tweet, Crockett dismantled Owens' defense. "This isn't just about words spoken in the heat of a moment," Crockett said in a televised interview. "This is about the dangerous ideology Candace Owens is aligning herself with. Nationalism, as she defines it, is a callback to a time when hate was accepted, when division was the norm. It's about rewriting history to justify a future where inequality is not just tolerated, but accepted. It's about making people like her comfortable with their privilege while turning a blind eye to the suffering of others." The media, which had once given Owens a platform to spread her views, now watched as Crockett held her accountable. Owens had been put on the defensive, and Crockett seized the opportunity, pushing forward the narrative that Owens couldn't deny. She had made a dangerous alliance with extremism, and now the public was paying attention. "What we saw today," Crockett continued, "is the result of years of rhetoric that has been allowed to fester unchecked." Owens' comments were not an isolated incident. They're part of a larger narrative she's been spreading, and now the truth is out. The truth is that there are people in this country who would rather cling to outdated ideologies than face the reality of the systemic injustice that exists. And that's not just harmful, it's dangerous. As Owens tried to regain control of the narrative, denying any support for Hitler or nationalism, the damage was already done. The backlash was swift and brutal. Owens found herself cornered, unable to escape the truth of her words. No matter how she tried to spin it, the truth had already set the course for the public's perception of her. Jasmine Crockett's condemnation wasn't just about calling out Owens for a single mistake. It was about calling out the ideology behind it. Crockett made it clear that this was no longer just a political debate. It was a battle for the soul of the nation, a fight between those who wanted to move forward and those who sought to bring back the darkness of the past. Owens had crossed a line, and now the world was watching as the consequences played out. In the end, Owens's attempt to downplay her comments was met with an overwhelming wave of disapproval. It was no longer just a matter of political disagreement. It was a moral issue, and Owens had lost. Crockett had not only exposed the truth, but she had become the voice of accountability, demanding that Owens, and those like her, face the consequences of their actions. The public had spoken, and the message was loud and clear. Extremism had no place in the future of this country. The air in the room was thick with tension, a charged silence hanging over the audience after the fiery exchanges. Candace Owens, who had made her career by challenging the left, now found herself on the defensive. But she wasn't ready to back down. After the video had shattered her carefully constructed narrative, Owens quickly regained her composure, her eyes narrowing as she prepared for a counterattack. With a sharp inhale, she leaned into the microphone, her voice rising with a calculated intensity. "You know, Jasmine, what you're doing here is nothing short of manipulation," Owens declared, her gaze sweeping across the room. "You're taking a real issue, racial inequality, and using it as a crutch to build your political career. You're weaponizing racism, turning it into a tool for personal gain. It's disgusting. You've turned the struggle of Black Americans into a political game, and that's not only irresponsible, it's shameful." Her words were calculated, meant to paint Crockett as the villain, to distract from her own missteps. But it was clear that her accusation was a desperate attempt to shift the focus, to regain control of the narrative that was slipping away from her. The room held its breath. Owens had made her move, but Jasmine Crockett, standing tall and composed, wasn't about to let her words slide. Crockett's eyes remained fixed on Owens, unwavering. She had heard this rhetoric before, the constant refrain of playing the race card, the dismissal of Black struggle as a political strategy. But Crockett knew better. She had seen the damage caused by such rhetoric, had watched as these lies tore at the very fabric of her community, and now she was ready to fight back, to expose the dangerous truth behind Owens' words. "You want to talk about manipulation, Candace?" Crockett's voice was calm, but every word was laced with the weight of truth. "You stand there claiming that I'm using race to build my career. But let me tell you something. You're doing the very same thing. You're using your platform to spread dangerous lies, to manipulate the narrative, and to fuel a division that has no place in this country. You are using your influence to tell people that racism is no longer a problem, that the pain and suffering so many people face every single day is just some kind of fabricated story. Crockett paused, letting her words sink in, allowing the weight of the accusation to settle. The room was dead silent, everyone waiting to hear what would come next. Owens, once so poised and confident, now seemed to recoil slightly. But Crockett wasn't finished. She wasn't about to let Owens off the hook, not when the stakes were so high. "You want to talk about political careers, Candace?" Crockett's voice rose, her intensity now matching the weight of the moment. "You've built yours on denying the very real struggles of Black Americans. You've made a name for yourself by twisting the truth, by perpetuating a narrative that serves only your own interests. You have the power to influence millions, and what are you doing with that power? You're using it to spread extremism, to preach that Black people should just pull themselves up by their bootstraps without acknowledging the systems that have held us down for generations. You're standing there selling a lie, and you're doing it to make a profit. You're not interested in justice, Candace. You're interested in power." The room was electric, the energy shifting from uncertainty to a collective sense of outrage. Crockett's words were cutting deep, and it was clear she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every Black American who had ever been told they weren't working hard enough, who had been told that their struggles were imaginary, that their fight for justice was just a political stunt. Owens, visibly rattled, straightened up, her defense becoming more frantic. "That's not what I said. You're twisting everything I've said," she snapped, her voice trembling slightly, no longer as confident as before. "I don't deny racism exists. I've never said that. But I'm telling you, the real problem is personal responsibility, not the system. Black people can succeed, just like anyone else, if they take responsibility for their lives." But Crockett wasn't buying it. She wasn't going to let Owens twist her words and manipulate the conversation any longer. "Personal responsibility?" Crockett scoffed, her eyes flashing with fire. "You don't get to lecture people about personal responsibility when you've never had to fight for every inch of opportunity in a system that was never designed to help you. You don't get to stand there and talk about responsibility when you've never had to worry about being shot by the police for simply existing. You've never had to worry about being denied a job, a house, or even the chance to live in peace because of the color of your skin. And yet, you're standing here telling people that they're the problem." Each word Crockett spoke was a pointed challenge, cutting to the heart of the issue. The room, once divided, was now drawn together in unity, united not by party lines, but by the undeniable truth Crockett was speaking. She wasn't just defending her beliefs, she was defending the very real lived experiences of millions of Americans who had been systematically oppressed. "You stand here, Candace, talking about personal responsibility," Crockett continued, her voice strong. "But the truth is, you're blind to the reality of what Black people face every single day. You're blind to the fact that the system is rigged. You're blind to the fact that your words are hurting people. And worse, you're using your platform to spread this dangerous message to others, to convince them that the system isn't broken, that nothing needs to change. You're the one doing the manipulating here, Candace. You're the one using the truth to push your own agenda." As Crockett finished, the room erupted into applause. The audience, once uncertain, was now fully behind her, sensing the truth that had been laid bare. Owens, on the other hand, was left floundering, unable to respond. Her defenses had crumbled under the weight of Crockett's relentless, unwavering truth. The air was thick with the intensity of the moment. Crockett had won, not just the debate, but the moral high ground. Owens, who had once been so confident, now stood exposed, her words no longer able to shield her from the truth. The fallout from Candace Owens' comments had been swift, brutal, and unforgiving. What had begun as a fiery political debate on a public stage had quickly spiraled into a full-scale scandal, with Owens now standing at the center of a storm she could not control. The video clip, circulating rapidly across social media, became the spark that ignited the backlash, a backlash that soon engulfed her career, reputation, and personal life. The moment her words were exposed for what they were, the reaction was immediate. The media, which had once celebrated her as a rising star, now turned on her with a vengeance. News outlets that had once featured Owens in primetime slots, offering her a platform to promote her views, began to distance themselves. Major media organizations like Fox News, which had frequently given her a voice, issued official statements distancing themselves from her rhetoric. Contracts that once seemed secure and steady were now being pulled. The conservative pundit was no longer the darling of the right. She was the pariah, the person who had crossed a line that even her most loyal followers couldn't overlook. Her social media accounts, once a battleground for heated exchanges and political sparring, became a war zone of hate and betrayal. Twitter exploded with condemnation from both sides of the political spectrum. Her name trended, but not in the way she had anticipated. The hashtags Candace Owens, exposed and shame on Owens, filled up feeds, drowning out her attempts to defend herself. Some of her former allies, people who had once praised her for speaking her truth, were now turning their backs on her, disavowing her remarks in public statements. "Never in my life did I think I would have to disown someone I once supported," one prominent conservative voice tweeted, their disillusionment clear in every word. "This is not the message we stand for." The tweet was followed by a flood of similar condemnations. In a matter of hours, Owens went from being one of the most influential voices on the right to being a figure of public disgrace. The fallout wasn't just from progressives or left-leaning individuals, it was coming from all corners. The backlash was too great, too swift for her to manage. But the most piercing part of this public humiliation came from within her own base. Former supporters of her work, people who had admired her unapologetic stance on issues of race, now found themselves questioning her integrity. The conservative movement that had once elevated her was now abandoning her. She was being painted as a danger to the cause she had championed, a figure who, in her attempt to be provocative, had stepped over a line that no one, regardless of political affiliation, could ignore. Her public defense of extremism, no matter how she tried to reframe it, had alienated her from the very people who had once stood by her. Behind the scenes, the impact was equally severe. Contracts with major conservative media outlets were terminated almost overnight. Her public speaking engagements were canceled in droves. The lucrative endorsements she had once enjoyed evaporated as quickly as the fallout had spread. She had been the face of a certain brand of conservative thought, outspoken, unafraid, and willing to push the boundaries. But now that very boldness had turned into her undoing. The scandal was too much for her to recover from, at least in the short term. For Owens, the collapse was sudden, shattering her career in an instant. Her phone rang incessantly, the messages piling up from former colleagues, agents, and managers, some offering words of sympathy, others simply cutting ties. There were the angry phone calls, the passive-aggressive emails, and the media requests for interviews that she now dreaded. She had become a subject of curiosity, yes, but not for the reasons she had hoped. The question on everyone's lips was no longer about her opinions on politics or race. It was about her ties to nationalism, about her ill-fated comparison to one of history's most notorious figures. The irony was almost unbearable. Candace Owens had built her empire by challenging the status quo, by questioning mainstream narratives, and by positioning herself as the voice of the disenfranchised in the conservative movement. But in the wake of her Hitler comments, she became the embodiment of everything she had spent her career fighting against. The public's perception of her had shifted from being a fierce fighter for conservative values to a symbol of extremism and intolerance. The very platform that had helped her rise to prominence had now turned its back on her, and the media, the very thing that had catapulted her into the spotlight, had now become the source of her downfall. The irony wasn't lost on Crockett. She had seen this kind of thing before, seen how dangerous ideas could be cloaked in words that sounded so convincing at first. But this time, she had a front-row seat to the unraveling. Crockett had been relentless in her condemnation of Owens, and she was not about to let the public forget the damage Owens had done. Every interview, every tweet, every speech was an opportunity for Crockett to double down, to make it clear that the dangerous ideologies Owens had flirted with were not just dangerous to the Black community, but to the country as a whole. Candace Owens has spent her entire career minimizing the very real, very painful struggles that Black Americans face, Crockett said in a televised interview, her tone calm but full of conviction. She's used her platform to spread lies, to fuel hate, and to dismiss the systemic racism that continues to destroy lives. What she said about Hitler, about nationalism, was not a slip of the tongue. It was an endorsement of everything we have been fighting against for generations. She's using her platform to perpetuate division, and that is something we cannot allow. Crockett's words echoed through news outlets, and the impact was undeniable. The backlash Owens faced wasn't just personal, it was a moral reckoning. It wasn't just about defending her career or salvaging her public image. The debate had shifted into something more significant, a battle over the future of the nation's discourse, one that Crockett had every intention of winning. And while Owens tried desperately to regain control of the narrative, issuing statements claiming the video was taken out of context, Crockett remained resolute. "You can spin this all you want, but the truth is clear," Crockett continued, her voice unwavering. "You've shown us who you really are, Candace, and it's time for the country to take a long, hard look at the damage you've done. You are not a champion for freedom. You're an architect of division, and that's a legacy I will not let stand." As the public reaction intensified, Owens's attempts to spin her words began to fall apart. The media had turned on her, and there was no escape from the storm she had created. She was now forced to face the consequences of her words. Words that had once seemed harmless, but that now carried a much heavier weight. The country had spoken, and the backlash was deafening. Her fall from grace had come quickly, but the damage she had caused would take much longer to repair, if it could be repaired at all. The storm had passed, but its aftermath left a trail of destruction in its wake. The media frenzy surrounding Candace Owens' comments and the fallout from her scandal had completely reshaped the narrative of the debate. Owens, once a leading figure in conservative circles, was now scrambling to regain control of the narrative. But for Jasmine Crockett, this was not just another moment in her political journey. It was a defining one. As the dust settled and the world watched, Crockett found herself not just defending her views, but solidifying her place as one of the most powerful voices in the Democratic Party. Crockett's career had always been defined by her unwavering commitment to justice. She had spent years battling in the trenches, fighting for the rights of those whose voices had long been ignored. But the debate with Owens marked a turning point. The intensity of the moment had thrust her into the national spotlight, and now the world was paying attention. She had not only confronted Owens head-on, but had dismantled her arguments with precision, revealing the dangerous rhetoric Owens had been spreading. The victory was monumental, not just for Crockett, but for the larger movement of racial justice that she had championed. The moment of triumph, however, was not without its cost. As Owens' world crumbled, Crockett's own journey had just begun to gain momentum. The debate, which had started as a simple political discourse, had evolved into a battle for the soul of America. Crockett had become the face of the struggle for justice, and the implications of this shift were felt across the country. Her voice, once a passionate but relatively quiet presence in political circles, had now become a rallying cry for those who sought a better future, a future where inequality and systemic racism were no longer tolerated. The impact of the debate was undeniable. It highlighted the stark contrast between two fundamentally opposing worldviews, one rooted in justice and equality, the other in division and denial. For many, Crockett's response to Owens was the crystallization of everything that was at stake in the ongoing battle for racial equity in America. It was a moment where Crockett's values were not just defended, they were elevated to the national stage, challenging the very foundations of what many thought they knew about the future of the country. Crockett was not just another politician rising through the ranks. She was a force of nature, a leader who had proven herself on the front lines. The spotlight that had once illuminated Owens now shone squarely on Crockett. But the attention came with its own set of challenges. The political establishment, both in her own party and across the aisle, had to reckon with the power she wielded. They had seen her fight with fire, not just in words but in actions, and they knew that the future of the party would depend on whether they embraced her leadership or tried to silence her. Yet Crockett was undeterred. The challenges, the obstacles, the attacks, None of it mattered. She had always known that her path would not be an easy one. As a black woman in politics, she had faced the kind of systemic opposition that few could truly comprehend. She had watched as the powers that be tried to label her as an angry radical, as someone too willing to speak the truth that they were all too afraid to face. But she had turned every attack, every criticism, into fuel for her mission. Now, more than ever, she was ready to confront the injustices that had defined her entire life and career. The debate had done something to Crockett. It had awakened something deeper, something more powerful. The backlash that Owens had received wasn't just a victory for Crockett. It was a vindication of everything she had fought for. Every marginalized voice, every oppressed community had been given a platform in that moment, and Crockett had been their champion. The fight was far from over, but the momentum was now on her side. The debate also shed light on the deepening polarization in American politics. On one side, Crockett's vision of racial justice and equality stood in direct opposition to Owens's call for a return to a dangerous nationalism that dismissed the very real struggles of marginalized communities. The divide was clear. Crockett represented the future of a country that sought to heal its wounds and build a more just society, while Owens embodied the forces that were determined to keep those wounds open, to perpetuate the lie that inequality was a thing of the past. As the media continued to cover the aftermath, Crockett's influence only grew. She was invited to speak at rallies, interviews, and forums across the country, her message resonating with a broader audience than ever before. The Democratic Party, which had often struggled to unite its base, now had a powerful and clear voice leading the charge. Crockett's message was not just about politics. It was about the future of America, about a vision where every person, regardless of their race, background, or circumstance, had an equal shot at success. The narrative surrounding Crockett began to shift, and she found herself at the heart of a new movement, one that wasn't just about opposing the right, but about forging a path forward. She had proven that she was willing to challenge the status quo, to confront the deep-seated injustices that had plagued the country for generations. Now, her leadership was being recognized not just by her supporters, but by those who had once dismissed her as a mere figurehead. Crockett was no longer just another voice in the crowd. She was a force to be reckoned with. But Crockett knew this victory was only the beginning. She had opened a door, but the fight was far from over. The forces she had exposed, the ones that sought to keep America divided, to deny the existence of systemic racism and inequality, would not go down without a fight. And while the momentum was on her side now, she understood that the real work was still to come. It was a work that would require more than just speeches and headlines. It would require the kind of leadership that could unite the country, heal its wounds, and finally dismantle the systems of injustice that had held so many back for so long. For now, though, Jasmine Crockett had proven that she was ready for whatever came next. Her moment had arrived, and the world was watching. This was no longer just about one debate, one victory. This was about the future of America, and Crockett was determined to ensure that the future would be one where justice and equality were not just ideals, but reality. The stakes were higher than ever, and Crockett was not about to let them slip away. The room was still buzzing with the aftermath of the fierce debate, the air thick with the tension that had escalated to an unimaginable height. Jasmine Crockett stood tall, her posture unshaken, even as the weight of the entire nation seemed to bear down on her. She had just delivered the defining blow, the moment that would forever change the trajectory of this conversation. One that had started with political rhetoric, but had spiraled into something much larger, more profound. Candace Owens, once brimming with confidence, was now a broken figure, her facade cracking under the pressure of the truth. But despite her victory in this battle, Crockett knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a larger war, one for the soul of America. The echoes of Owens's words still lingered in the room, and Crockett knew that they would continue to reverberate across the country. Owens's attempt to erase the pain of systemic racism, to dismiss the struggle for justice as a mere political ploy, had failed. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back. But even as Owens reeled from the impact of her own words, Crockett understood the dangerous forces that were still at play. The battle for justice was not won with one debate, one clash. It would take every ounce of strength, every day of perseverance, to push back against the forces of division and hate that were so deeply entrenched in American society. Crockett took a deep breath, her mind racing as the weight of the moment sank in. She had just taken on one of the most influential voices of the far right, and for the first time, it felt as if the tide was beginning to turn. The energy in the room had shifted. What had once been a one-sided confrontation was now a moment of reckoning, not just for Owens, but for the millions of Americans who were watching, who were listening, and who had been waiting for a leader like Crockett to finally speak out. It wasn't just about politics. It was about the truth of what had been happening to Black Americans for generations, and the fight to ensure that truth could no longer be ignored. But Crockett knew better than to believe that the fight was over. The forces she was up against were powerful, and they had been entrenched for far too long. Owens might have been temporarily silenced, but her ideology, the dangerous narrative that fueled division and denied the existence of systemic oppression, was far from gone. It would take more than just words to dismantle the structures that had kept so many in chains for centuries. It would take action. It would take unity. It would take courage in the face of overwhelming opposition, and Crockett was ready for it. With a calm but resolute voice, Crockett addressed the room once again, her words carrying the weight of everything she had fought for. "This is not just about me, and it's not just about Candace Owens," she began, her eyes sweeping across the room, making eye contact with each person whose life had been touched by the systemic forces she had spent years exposing. "This is about every single person who has ever been told their life doesn't matter. This is about every Black American who has had to fight, not just for their place in society, but for their right to exist with dignity, with equality. And this right here is about ensuring that no one, no matter how powerful, no matter how loud, can ever erase that truth again." Her voice grew stronger, the conviction in her words undeniable. The forces that try to keep us divided, the ones that tell us to accept injustice as the way things are the same forces that have been trying to silence us for generations. They will do anything to keep us from recognizing the power we hold when we stand together, when we speak the truth, when we fight for what is right. But I'm here to tell you, this is our moment. This is the moment where we make it clear that justice will not be pushed aside, that the truth will not be buried under lies. We have the power, and we will not stop until justice is no longer a dream, but a reality for every person, in every community, in every corner of this nation. The room erupted into applause, but Crockett's focus never wavered. She knew that applause was just a small sign of support, a fleeting moment in time. The real work would begin now. This moment, this victory over Owens's rhetoric, had merely served as a signal that the fight was real, that it was ongoing, and that it would take everything to dismantle the systems of power that had long gone unchecked. It would take more than just one debate to change a nation. It would take a movement. Jasmine Crockett had no illusions about the road ahead. The truth, though powerful, was not enough to break the chains of injustice. She had seen firsthand the way the system worked, how it fought back, how it adapted, how it crushed anyone who dared to challenge it. But she had also seen what happened when people fought back. She had seen what happened when the truth became too loud to ignore. She had seen the spark of change, and now she was ready to fan it into a fire that would burn brighter than anything the powers of division could muster. The moment Crockett had just experienced, standing tall, facing down one of the loudest voices of the far right and emerging victorious, was a testament to the power of truth, the power of resilience, and the power of justice. But it was also a reminder of the fight that lay ahead. The battle for racial equality, for justice, for truth, was not something that could be won in a single debate or a single victory. It was a lifelong struggle, one that would demand every ounce of courage and strength from those willing to stand up and fight for what was right. And as Crockett walked off the stage, the weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. She had won today, but the real fight was just beginning. With every step she took, she was more determined than ever to ensure that the truth would continue to be heard, no matter how loud the opposition became. The world had seen what happened when one person stood up for justice, and now it was time to see what would happen when millions did the same. For Jasmine Crockett, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was the first step in a movement that would change the course of history. The forces of extremism, the forces of division, had been exposed. And now it was time for the forces of truth and justice to rise up and claim their place in the future of America. As Jasmine Crockett stood there, the dust of the battle settling around her, a quiet realization washed over her. The fight wasn't just about winning a debate, silencing a controversial voice, or proving her point. No, this was about something far more profound. This moment had stripped bare the truth that so many had spent lifetimes trying to ignore. It wasn't just about a political argument. It was about the very essence of justice, equality, and what it means to stand up in the face of overwhelming adversity. She had fought not just for herself, but for everyone whose voice had been drowned out by those who refused to see their humanity. Her words had cut through the lies, the twisted rhetoric, and the dangerous ideologies that had long held power. But the cost of this fight had been steep. The weight of every insult, every attack, every attempt to dismiss her had been borne on her shoulders alone. She had been called angry, radical, and divisive. She had been told to sit down, to be quiet, to accept the injustice around her. But instead, she had chosen to stand up and speak the truth, no matter the consequences. In that moment, Crockett understood something essential. The greatest battles aren't won with fists or sharp words alone. They're won with the courage to stand up when it would be easier to remain silent. They're won by those willing to confront the forces that seek to keep others in the shadows, to expose the truth even when it's uncomfortable, even when it threatens to upend everything. The truth was the weapon that would tear down the walls built to divide and silence. And Jasmine Crockett had chosen to wield it, with every ounce of strength and determination she had. But the journey wasn't over. It never was. For every victory won, another battle would rise in its place. The forces of division, the voices of hate, the systems that perpetuate inequality, they wouldn't disappear overnight. They were deeply entrenched, woven into the fabric of society, and they wouldn't go quietly into the night. And that was the painful reality Crockett had to face. The momentary triumph over Owens, though satisfying, was only the beginning of a much larger, more challenging war. What Crockett had come to realize was that real change doesn't come from defeating an enemy in one battle. It comes from an unyielding commitment to keep fighting, keep pushing forward, and keep telling the truth, no matter how difficult or dangerous it may be. It comes from knowing that the path to justice is not linear. It is full of setbacks, frustrations, and moments of doubt. But it is also filled with moments of clarity, moments of triumph, and moments where the truth shines so brightly that nothing can hide it. As Crockett stood there, the weight of the moment not yet fully settling in, she knew that her journey was far from over. There were more people to fight for, more systems to tear down, and more lies to expose. But there was also a deeper understanding of the stakes. This was more than just a political fight. It was a fight for the soul of the nation, for the very heart of what it meant to be free, to be equal, and to be human. For Jasmine Crockett, the lesson was clear. When you fight for justice, you do so not for the applause or the recognition, but because the fight itself is the only way forward. The world may try to silence you, the world may try to turn its back on the truth, but the truth will always find its way to the surface. And when it does, nothing will ever be the same again. The battle may never be easy, but the victory of truth, in the end, is worth every sacrifice. And so, the journey continued, because as long as there was injustice, there would always be a need for warriors like Jasmine Crockett, ready to fight, ready to stand tall, and ready to speak the truth, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.